Very nice. They get a choice of Western. My buddy came back to Chicago too, but he's up in
That's fine. Wherever you heard about that.
Thank you. I was just talking Buzz and I thought that was important.
Welcome to Sunday with Friends. I'm glad you all are here. I'm Teddy Bundy and I'm the president of the Friends of the Library. I want to wish every one of you a happy anniversary. I know some of you are single and some of you are married, but you don't have to go to the grocery store and look for champagne. You don't have to go to the Hallmark shop and get a card. This is our 20th anniversary for Sunday with Friends. We started in the late 90s with Ida Patton, one of the founders of the FOL, along with Ben Jennings. And Ben thought the library needed a group to come together to enjoy the books written by local authors and readers. At that time, our organization was called Celebrations of Local Writers. We had presentations by Richard Foyle, who wrote about Kumbo China. Remember Kumbo China? Ed Davis and John Morgan wrote about the Virginia Creeper Trail. But around the year 2000, the library board renamed us and we became Sunday with Friends. Ben Jennings, who is now a retired English professor, got us organized, and he also started a similar program at Virginia Highlands Community College. The two seemed to help each other. One group would entertain, and back and forth they went. Now we all enjoy our local and regional writers. Some are from the Deep South, and fill up this room with 80 to 100 people about 8 Sunday afternoons every year. So 800 times 20 is at least 1,600 happy people. But we have a few programs at the community center and Signet Spring Presbyterian Church because of the size of the group that comes in. So I'd say we've had about 2,000 employees. I want to thank Ben, who isn't here, and Ida, who's not here. Now, you are the champagne for Ben, and I'm sorry he's not here. I quote Ida Patton when she said she believes that libraries do make a difference in the lives of people. Next.
Hello, my name's Charlotte Parsons, and I have the real distinct pleasure of being the director of this library. It is something spectacular for any nonprofit group to have a series that has gone on consecutively as long as Sunday with Friends. And it would not have happened if we had not had so many wonderful friends of the library. Let me see a show of hands of how many people are members of the Friends of the Library. Well, that's pretty good. But the rest of you all, you can join. You don't want to feel left out. I mean, that's never a good feeling.
You got enough room for everybody?
We have enough room. We have enough room. And your membership dues is one of the things that helps support programs like this. We have a few little announcements for you. We're going to try to tighten that up and encourage you to look at the table that's back there where Jim Moore and David are. That has a summary of some of the activities that are going on with the Friends of the Library and also library activities. We are conducting a survey. We plan to do this at every one of our programs. It helps us tremendously in doing our programming. It helps us know how to publicize events, and it helps us know the kinds of activities that you all are most interested in. And another thing that we've not tried, but it just, is donations. We never, the library, unless it is a distinct fundraising event like an author event, a book and author event, where we're serving food or wine usually, we charge for those events. But everything else that we do as a library and that the Friends of the Library does is always free. So if you would like to make a donation to the Friends of the Library, you are certainly welcome to do that. And there's a little place that you can make a donation back there on the table. We have some good things after the program, the most wonderful refreshments. Bob, this is getting up there with Joanne Horsch in the refreshment section. We have refreshments provided by our hospitality committee. Nancy McMurray and her daughter Melanie. Wave your hands over there so they'll know who the cookie ladies are. They provided the refreshments, and then Earl will be staying around, and you can buy his books, and he'll be glad to sign them. And now there's another treat. Carol Thompson-Fields is going to introduce the speaker. She is a long-term personal friend of mine, and she is certainly a true friend of the library. She has a little connection with Earl that she's going to tell you about. So thank you all for coming.
I'll say, It's with enormous honor, I'm gonna change this a little bit. So right. And privilege today to introduce photojournalist Earl Carter. And I'd like to start with a tiny little personal story. Back in 1980, Earl was chief photographer and my boss at the Kingsport Times-News. And during that time, one of my assignments was to photograph a speaker who was demonstrating the exciting future of laser technology. While I was watching him, I got this crazy idea that I wanted to combine a portrait of him with his laser light show, but to do so, it would involve bringing him back to the Times News studio and stage the shot. I came back and I told Earl, but I didn't have a clue how to go about doing this, and he agreed to help me. So it turned out that the final deceptively simple looking photo involved a double exposure, studio lighting, and a reoccurrence of a laser light show. The first attempt I don't even know if Earl remembers this, but the first attempt that we did in the studio didn't work, because you'll remember this is 38 years ago, before digital cameras, and you really didn't even know if you had a final product until you had developed it in the darkroom and knew if you had a working negative. So we had to call the speaker back in and restage the whole thing, and the second time it worked. When we finally processed the final successful image, I asked Earl, I said, well, how do we credit this photo? You worked on it as much as I did. And Earl replied, he said he didn't want credit, and that since the idea had been mine, and he'd only helped to make it possible. Now, generosity of time and knowledge, kindness, and a touch of modesty, and you will see why this is so unusual and important in just a minute. Earl, now to get to this, to the important stuff. Earl began developing photos as a young boy in a converted bathroom to darkroom at the Kingsport Boys Club. After he won honorable mention on a national level at the Boys Club contest, his photo was printed in the Kingsport Times-News, where he was subsequently offered a part-time job after school. He went on to become chief photographer and head of the photo department, and he has since worked at the Miami Herald, was photo editor of the Huntsville, Alabama Times. He has contributed his images to innumerable journals, publications, TV networks, and private companies. Over his 50-year career, his photographs have won multiple awards from the prestigious National Press Photographers Association, the Tennessee Press Association, and the Associated Press. Earl was the United Press International Photographer of the Year for the state of Tennessee. Many photojournalists at least one time in their life wish they were just a fly on the wall. The second you raise a camera, people change. They start to adjust their tie or fix their hair or their expressions. The trick is to make them trust you enough to forget that you have a camera in your hand at all. And this is what Earl does. He doesn't trick people, but he has this ability to make them forget that he has a camera. His images of a huge array of subject matter possess technical expertise, but most importantly, a sincerity and honesty that are not manipulated or gimmicky like the photo that I earlier described, and it's no wonder he didn't want to take credit for it. But his photos are a testament to the ease he gains with the subjects around him. His extensive body of work chronicling Appalachia over the fast-changing era, an era that I think most of everybody here in this room has lived in, puts him in, this is not a stretch to say, puts him in the category as one of the most important American photographers in the last part of the 20th century and the first part of the 21st century. Would you please give a warm welcome to Earl Carter.
Wow, I don't know how to respond to that. Tell you, Thank you. I'm very flattered to have you say those things about me. I looked around, I saw all these chairs when I first came in. I said, you don't need all these chairs for me. And then everybody showed up, and I'm thinking, wow. And then after what she said, but I know why you're here. It's the desserts, right? It's the refreshments. People show up when there's free food. So thank you all for coming out. I'm very, very honored to be here, that they've asked me to come and be here today. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to alter my presentation. I had a few wild tales, but there's 3 folks in the audience that I used to work with, so I'm going to have to not lie today. Carol, Gary Waters over here, Mark Mahoney back there, and Carol we stole from the Coalfield Progress way back in the days, and we couldn't keep her very long. She went off to be a mom and a wife and an advocate for many things. What I'm going to do today is start out with a little video presentation here that kind of give you an overview of the book, show some photographs. Then we're going to come back and go through and talk about the photographs, kind of how I got started, how it evolved. And you're welcome to ask questions at any time you would like. You know, just raise your hand up, and because ask me while I'm talking about it. I may forget what I said later, and I want to make sure I get it straight. So if we can get the lights there, we will start out with a little video presentation first. We lost our sound.
You muted it.
Where that red dot is.
Yeah. See where the red dot is?
I can't see anything in the dark here.
A little bit to the right.
Get my phone up where I can see what Okay, all right. We can start over here. Sorry about that. It's kind of hard to see up here in the dark.
You were right.
Okay. There we go. We're not through. For almost 50 years, working as a photo journalist, I made photographs of the southern Appalachian region. I admired the people, their culture, and their ability to make do with whatever circumstances they were given. As the title of the book says, it's a collection, an album of images, stories about the people, the places and the events that shaped their lives and became a part of mine. Please join me now for a look at some of those images.
Glossy brown.
One of my favorite book subjects was Ram Mendenhall, a circuit riding Methodist preacher who looked just like the stereotypical country preacher straight out of a movie. He was a kind, gentle man, told me stories of his early days when he used to make his rounds by horseback. In the winter it got so cold his boots would freeze to the stirrups. Fortunately, by the time I had photographed him, he was using a pickup truck. It was just an old chair on the front porch, weathered and worn, with a hint of its former grandeur as a fine piece of furniture in somebody's house. The front porch was the last step before it went to a landfill or an Appalachian bonfire. Joe Morrell was a well-known studio musician in Nashville, Tennessee. Upon his retirement, his dream was to build a guitar-shaped building which would house his memorabilia and various musical instruments. Kids in Appalachia do pretty much the same thing as kids everywhere. They like to get together and cruise and see their friends on the weekend. And they play sports. Football, in this case, even though they have to practice in a farm field. I remember Laura Bernard, who insisted on holding her prized pumpkin for me while I took her photograph. I was so worried that she was not going to be able to hold it, I tried to hurry as quick as I could. Bluegrass legend Bill Monroe was quite a character when I met him, but he was more interested in me taking a picture of his belt buckle than anything. I'll never forget the day that June Carter asked me to make a photograph of her and Johnny Cash. And the way that session went, it wasn't quite what I expected. I'll tell you all about that later. Stories I've heard at country stores could probably fill a book all their own. When these guys gathered, you never knew what you were going to hear. And then there was Mally Carroll. Mally operated her country store all by herself after her husband passed away. Mally never used a computer or a cash register. She figured everything up by hand with her pencil. When I first met Walter and Rita Larkey, I knew exactly what kind of picture I wanted to make of them. They reminded me so much of the couple in Grant Wood's famous painting, American Gothic. When I asked Walter if he'd ever heard of Grant Wood, he kind of scratched his head, nodded, and said, "No, I don't think he lives around here." Perhaps the most remarkable group of people I ever met was coal miners. They live in a world underground that most of us will never experience. Sometimes they can't even stand upright all day because they're working in a low seam coal, and it's not tall enough for them to do that. History may have forgotten Stonega, Virginia, but I don't think I ever will, or the kids I remember playing on the railroad tracks. Stonega was one of the last all-black segregated coal camps in the Appalachian region. It remained that way until the mid-60s, when immigration became law in the land. Don't want that, do we? Without a doubt, the one image I will always remember the most has got to be the photograph I took of 2-year-old Bonnie Lawson. First met her in 1966 in Hancock County, when we were doing a story about poverty in Appalachia. That picture of her, that old bent over dog and the pot-bellied stove, just stuck in my mind, and I always wondered what had become of her. 12 years after I took this picture, I made it my mission to find her again and find out what had become of her. Bonnie was a beautiful young teenager the next time I saw her, living with her family, Earl and Wanda Lawson, on the side of Clinch Mountain in Hancock County. As I look back on these images and stories, I feel very fortunate that the folks pictured here allowed me to be a part of their life, and they touched me in ways they will never know. And I hope that I have done them justice with my book, My Appalachian Album. Well, thank you. That's a little something I put together, kind of an introduction to the book that I use online, and a little smidgen of the photos that are throughout that.
Is it online now?
It is online.
YouTube?
Not at YouTube, but at AppalachianAlbum.com. On Vimeo, yes, you can see it. You can see it there and play it back, yeah. And information about the book online there too. I'm going to go through some photographs now and kind of talk a little bit about how this all started. The book came out in March of this year. It's been a dream of mine for quite some time to put this body of work, the pictures that I've taken throughout Appalachia, into some kind of form, permanent form, kind of closure on a career, I guess you would say. I did take other kinds of photos, and lots of them, but these were my favorite. I was very fortunate to work at a place that allowed me the freedom to do what I wanted to do. I started working at the Times News while I was still in high school, as Carol said. I won a insignificant award in a boys club contest, but they happened to need somebody at that time to work in the darkroom part-time. And that was me, and I worked with some fine folks. A guy named Tom Mosier was kind of a mentor to me when I started out. And I still know him and talk to him to this day, who taught me a certain way to do things, and I tried to emulate him because I had so much respect for him and everything that I did. Back then it was black and white, no digital as we know today. Used Tri-X film mostly. We didn't even shoot color when I started out at the Times News. Had to process everything. Carried a big old strobe around, and I remember at one time they sent me out with a 4x5 graphics camera because there wasn't another camera available, and I didn't have one at that time when I started. And you know how big those things were. I was totally lost. But kind of found my way through it, and bought myself a better camera. Started taking pictures, and as photographers in that day, as the three that are in here will tell you, we were very passionate about what we did, and we would spend our own time doing stories. If it's something we wanted to do, there wasn't time to do it, we would go on our own time and do it. That was just kind of the way with photographers. Photojournalists, I should say. Photographers catches everything. I prefer to say photojournalists because we were telling a story. We weren't just taking a picture. Nothing against other photographers by any means, but there is a difference in what we did, and I thought we were telling other people's stories, where the general public couldn't be there. We kept them informed about what was going on. So I was barely out of high school when I took the picture of the little girl with the dog you saw there. I was barely out of high school when I took that. Went down with a reporter, and the reason I didn't know who she was, the reporter didn't get her name as we went in. We went in this went down the road. We saw this little shack, we stopped in, and the lady let us in, and I saw the little girl there and the dog, and I thought, oh, I've got to photograph this while he talked to the lady. And she finally said something, well, my man will be back in a minute, y'all probably ought to leave. So we left. Turned out her husband was a really nice man, though, that I met 12 years later. He was a very nice man, but didn't know at the time, or I probably would have stayed there a lot longer. Now we're gonna bring up some photographs and go through here. Okay, you want to dim that just a little bit? There's the house I was talking about. And that's probably one of my favorite pictures of all time. That was taken in 1966, a long time ago. Didn't know what I had because you had to go back, process your film, look at it, that was the way of photography in that time. No instant gratification of seeing it on your camera. Totally different world. That was the mother. I'm gonna go through some faces. People are my favorite subjects. I know there are people who like to do landscapes, who like to do sports, who like to do a little bit of everything, but I always kind of connected with people. This lady I saw in Hilton's, Virginia, with her gourd, walking down from her house to a little stream that ran under a bridge beside the highway. Not exactly sanitary, but that's where she got her water. Went there every day. Here's the lady with the gourd, Laura Bernard. And she amazed me with this thing. I thought this poor lady is going to fall over, faint or something. She was much stronger than she looked, apparently. I love these folks, absolutely love them. That's from over in Hilton's, Virginia. Walter and Reba Larkey. I saw them out working in a field as I was driving by, and I don't remember what the crop was they were working on, but as soon as I saw her, little Reba, and that little smile of hers, I just fell in love with her. And then he came up and I thought, oh, I know, like I said, I know what kind of picture I'm going to take of these folks, Exactly. That's one of my favorites of all time. And I'll pass people on the road, like James Lewis here, just walking down the road. People tell me, it's a world, Earl, you don't get shot or something or whatnot, but I found that if you show an interest in people, a sincere interest in what they're doing, most of them are willing to tell you, that you think they're important enough, you want to know what they're doing or something about them, and everybody has a story. I don't care who you are. These fellows have lots of stories. I should have recorded those. And this is something you don't see much of anymore. And like I said, if you have any questions, just yell them out as we're going through. Yes, sir.
Were these in the 60s?
These are the 60s.
Yes.
60s. I started taking these pictures in 1965. I graduated from high school, started working there full time. So these are all in the first few years that I was taking pictures before everybody told me the correct way you're supposed to do things. I was just kind of going on instinct. And luckily we had a photo editor at that time who ran Sunday feature pages of photograph stories. So we were obliged to come up with those, and I thought that was the most wonderful thing in the world, that we had a place to put these stories. So there was a little bit of competition just to get your layout, your stories in there. This poor lady, I drove by her house and saw her, and she was hanging out laundry, and I could not believe that anybody was living in that. Although I'll have to say, I lived in a place much worse than that when I was a little bit older than that young man right there. So I think I can kind of empathize with these folks that I run into. I kind of know what they're going through and what their living conditions are. Here he is. Now I went back and found him later on. In the back of the book there's an epilogue where I tried to find as many of the folks that were still alive as I could and see what had become of them. That's something that doesn't happen in the newspaper business. You do a story one day, next day you're on to something else. You never know what becomes of those people, or follow-up stories. Very rarely happens. So I wanted to know what become of them. This man walks across this little bridge every day, about 200 yards. It's not really that far, but I guess it is for him. in his bucket to get water. I found so many people didn't have running water. And I can relate to that. We didn't have running water when I was little either. So I can relate to that, but we had a cistern. Everybody know the difference between a cistern and a well?
Yeah.
Okay, cistern, it comes off of the roof. The well, it comes up, yeah. Flossie Brown and her kids live on the highway on the side of a mountain over near Harlan, Kentucky. And I was just driving by one day, and they were out there hanging up their laundry and everything, and I stopped and talked to them. And this young gal there, I remember her, the one hanging on the clothesline. I remember her being worried about her future, what she was going to do. There was nothing to do there, no future. She didn't want to work in the coal mines or anything like that. She was going to move away. And I went back. That's one of the one I did epilogue on, and she did move away. Lives up in Ohio somewhere now. All of you have seen this place, right?
Yeah.
This was when it was brand new. And Joe was quite a fellow. This was his dream, and I'm glad he got to do it before he passed away. He had all kind of memorabilia in there, all kind of musical instruments, even bought a radio station and had it in there for a short period of time. And I think, didn't Steve Johnson, who developed all these local businesses, buy it? Maybe with plans to do something with it? This is just an Allendale farm in Kingsport, when it was still a farm. Okay, here's Rand Mendenhall. Was a circuit riding Methodist preacher, as I said before. This is over in the Fairview section of Scott County. Now, you couldn't have picked a better guy if you were going to make a movie about a country preacher. Does he not look like the stereotypical country preacher? And such a sweet man. But I went with him one day when he was making his rounds. He'd go visit members of his church. He had like 5 churches at that time. And I don't know how that worked out, because usually, you got usually 4 Sundays in a month. But I guess they just went in rotation. Everybody met at whichever particular church it was going to be at the time. A big influence back at that time was Life magazine. And most of you folks can remember Life magazine and all the stories that they had in there. I was very heavily influenced by the things that Life magazine did. If you've ever been to the Carter Fold, and most of you in here probably have, you remember it when it was like that? When the crowds got too big inside the little store down there, Jeanette built a little lean-to out back here and put these logs on the hill. That's right behind the store. Before they ever started building the building, and found out that people would come to it. So made plans to go ahead and construct something more permanent. That is Jeanette and Sarah and Joe. Of course, that only worked in good weather. There used to be a train, the Southwest Virginia Railroad, that ran there. There were plans to run it from Hilton's, Virginia to Bristol on the old line there. On this particular day, they were bringing folks up from Hilton's, which was only a couple miles down the road, but it was quite impressive to have the train there. I don't know what became of it, but it never managed to make the plans for it to go between Hilton's and Bristol as a scenic tourist railroad. I don't know what became of that. And that's June backstage. Remember her sitting back there and said, "Honey, tell me all about your kinfolk." So who you kin to? Let's just find out if we're kissing cousins or not. And found out we related to her mama by way of the Addingtons, but not close enough to be kissing cousins, she said. And she was one of the most delightful people I ever photographed. Just a real hoot all the time, always in good spirits, so much fun. And I said something about the story. She'd asked me to make this photograph. She was in Kingsport at a book signing, and I knew her from the Fold before, and I went out to take some pictures, and she said, "John and I need a photograph." And I said, "Well, okay, I'm taking something." She said, "No, honey." I said, "We need one of them close-you-up kind of photographs." I said, "Oh, you mean you want like a portrait of the two of you?" And she said, yeah, that's what I want." I said, well, you probably need to come by the office or something, you know, where I've got a place to do it. And she said, okay, we'll do that when we get through here. And I'll never see him again. You know, I left. Well, a couple hours later, I was in the office there, and the front door is maybe 50 yards out from the office. And I heard kind of buzz going on, and I heard this voice that's unmistakable. Where's Earl? And you knew that's, you know, I'm Johnny Cash. And come back, and June is just, she's following, and she's waving and saying hi to everybody, and John's on a mission. You know, he comes in, and she comes in with him, and we had, you know, a few little pleasantries there, and said, okay, we're going to do this like this. And she said, I want to close to him. You know, she went over and hugged up to him like that and everything. And the flash went off a couple of times, and he said, are we done? I said, oh my God, you know, how often do you get Johnny Cash in your studio? I want to keep him here a little while. I said, no, John, let me take a couple more. So the flash went off, Are we through? I thought, oh my goodness. I don't know if he's putting me on or not. I have no idea because I don't know him real well. But June's just smiling the whole time, you know, and cutting up and going on. She's fine. So I said, let me get a couple more here. I'm trying to keep him as long as I can. You know, a photographer always wants to take one more picture. So the flash goes off a couple more times, and he said, are we? And he got about that much out, and she hit him in the side with an elbow. And he grunted and never said another word. he was just anything you want after that. Now this place is no longer here. This is up Stonega, up past Appalachia and out that way. You folks may know where it is. But this was one of the last black coal camps, you know, in the coal fields. Blacks and whites were segregated for many years up until integration became law of the land in the mid-60s. They were all segregated. And it was pretty dismal looking place. This is the main road through there where the coal trucks would come down this way too.
The white camp was brick and called the $1 million coal camp.
Now they had their own church, they had their own school. You see the coal tip in the background. I think the coal mine is still there, but none of this other stuff is there anymore. That was the post office. That's the only thing that did service black and whites. And here's where the kids would play in the coal tracks or the railroad tracks. Pardon?
The quote white Stonega coal camp was all brick and called the $1 million coal camp too.
Was it really?
Yeah, it was one of the nicest ones going. The contrast is sharp.
It was down the road from this one,
Yes,
right?
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, it's now a lot of that's still there. Those
But
houses.
that was supposed to be the showcase.
Yeah.
The white one was.
Well, this might have been okay when it was first built because the houses, you know, there wasn't a lot of maintenance done on them. So at one time it might have been okay, but this was at the end of its life. This was in the late 60s, I think. You know, they were integrated. These kids were being bused to Appalachia at this time. Can you imagine how dirty those clothes must get with all that coal dust blowing around out there? The trucks coming through, you know, every few minutes. Now, the little kid in the middle, I met him and did a story about him in the epilogue. I had a Polaroid camera with me and took some photographs, and I was giving to the kids kind of an icebreaker. And they'd never held one before. You know, they knew what it was, but they were fascinated by it. And that's yours too, truly, back in the day when I had hair.
Oh, well.
He could see himself in the front of the lens and was intrigued by it.
Who took the picture?
Charlie Dean was with me, another photographer there. Charlie had gone out with me that day. A lot of times we would go on things together. It didn't happen very often because you usually couldn't get away and cover events, especially that far away. Now, I was very fortunate. I don't know how I got away with this, but I could usually just take off and go do these kind of things. I remember I left for 3 days one time. And I wrote down on there, I'm going to find Appalachia. And I ended up in Logan, West Virginia, just kind of wandering around. And thank God they didn't fire me. I don't know, looking back on it now, I don't know how I did it, but I was very blessed that they would let me do that. Yes, sir.
Did you have any question about the ownership of the pictures?
You mean the copyright on them, to print this? Yes, I talked to the publisher of the newspaper before I did the book and asked if it was okay if they had any problems with it. He said, fine. He said, go wear it out. He never thought it would be a good book. He said, and never thought I would actually do it.
Did you have those pictures with you? You have to go get them out of the newspaper
I
archive.
kept a lot of these pictures after a couple of incidents.
Jimmy, I used to take,
Yeah.
I was a journalist, photographic too. So
Oh, okay. Where'd you work?
I worked for the Richmond paper, AP.
Richmond, okay, well, you know what, you know how that works then. Our negatives had a way of getting lost. We had editors and people who would come in. You've had that happen. Now you're laughing. You know what I'm talking about, don't you? I had pictures of James Earl Ray in prison that were thrown out in the dumpster. I had pictures of the Clinchport flood, except for one hard copy that were given to TVA. I took pictures in Memphis when Martin Luther King was shot. Those were all thrown out. When they moved the location of the newspaper, they dumped everything in the dumpster and didn't tell us they were doing it. Came in and it was all gone. So I started keeping everything that meant something to me.
Do that at the Bristol paper too.
Yeah, did they?
Yep.
Yeah. There's some people just don't understand the importance of the history of those. Yeah, unfortunately. I had an opportunity, being part of the media too, to cover coal mining back in the day when you were allowed to go into coal mines. Much easier than you could now. It'd be an act of Congress to go down there as part of the media now. But I was able to go in coal mines on a regular basis about any time I wanted to if there was a story.
Earl, do you mind moving your mouse pointer off the
Is it
phone?
on there again? I'm sorry, how did I?
There you go.
I don't know how I've done that. Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Sorry. Yeah, that. I've lost this fellow's name. I don't know who he is or why he was on top of that coal car, because you usually don't go up there. But he was there and I went up there after him. This little fellow worked one of the coal loading tipples there, and
Still Beetle.
yeah.
That's not too far from what we were.
This fellow I met, he was changing a tire for a lady in Harlan, Kentucky. And I was just taken by his smile and his bright teeth. I said, you know, he'd be doing a toothpaste commercial. But you can see how low it is in there. Now that's a higher one too. There's some much lower than that. And I tell you, you've never been scared unless you've been in a mine about a mile underground, about 50 yards from where they're blasting the coal seam face. Back when they used to do that, the whole mountain shakes, everything. I mean, it is the scariest thing I've ever been in my life. And then these continuous miners came in. The blade, the bit there, churns over and over and over where they don't have to blast the face unless they hit rock or something. Blast the face and the coal just comes out on a conveyor and goes out automatically. That's where you have lunch underground and hope nobody runs over you with anything. It's not that bright down there, you know. He's sitting there in the dark. And this is a roof bolter, where he'll drill the roof, put a rod up through, and that piece of wood, hopefully to keep the rocks from splintering off and falling. This is Daint, Virginia. That's how it's D-A-N-T-E. Dante, as one of our editors used to call it, going over to Dante, but the folks there call it Daint. And this is a slag heap, may not be the correct name for it, but that's what I call it, the coal refuse up there. It's just, you know, it's a mountain behind them. Now this was the colored section of Daint. As in most of the coal communities, you barely have enough room for anything. The railroad track's going to take precedent no matter what. If it has to go, then you have a road, you have the house. Usually there's a creek in there somewhere too. And that's kind of the way most of the coalfield communities are. Can you imagine that close to your house? But you build where you can. Like I said, there's not a whole lot of good space in some of these places. And these fellows on strike, they weren't too happy to see me, but they were okay. They'll build a fire and congregate, get the news, and this fellow said, "I don't think you're going this way, buddy," and I didn't. Now, the last big strike in the coal fields was the Pittston strike in 1989, and you all might remember that. They usually had a strike about every 4 years in the coal fields as the contract would run out, and then they would have something, you know, that they disagreed on. So there would usually be a walkout, a lockout, or whatnot. This is a McClure prep plant over in, what, is that Dickinson County or?
Yeah.
Dickinson County. I
And
couldn't
it
remember.
usually began on the third shift.
Yes. I wonder why.
Cause they had all the young
Yeah.
firebrands on that shift.
Yeah. And here's of course, they would gather, they wanted to stop production of coal. They would have non-union miners come in and mine the coal, get it out, but it had to be gotten from the prep plant somewhere to load it up to get it out. So they tried to block the flow of coal by blocking the entrance to the prep plants and the mines. And of course, the media was all there. You may recognize some of these folks. I don't remember who they all are, but it was the most heavily covered. Oh, what in the world? I'm sorry, folks. I don't know what's going on here. It did its own thing.
Oh, that's what's, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, you don't have any control.
It won't take long.
Oh, I don't know about that. I don't know if it will or not. If we can stop it, if everybody wants to take a break a minute, this would be a good time to do it. We got a few more to go here. We'll see if we can. Yeah.
Need an apple.
Yeah. Sir. Pardon? A lot of times I did not have a writer with me. A lot of times, yes, yeah, I do write also, yes. I love that part of it, really. Okay, let's see what's going on here. Ask about having a writer with me. A lot of times I would go out with a writer, a reporter on a story. You know, if it was their story. If it was mine, usually I did the writing to it. The copy that went with it, or the captions, I would usually do that. Especially when we were doing the full page layouts. I would usually do the layout also. I do a little bit of everything. I wrote that, laid it out, designed it, did everything on the book. And I usually would do that on our Sunday pages that we did. When I got to Huntsville, Alabama as the photo editor, I had much more leeway to do whatever I wanted to do there with it than I had the Times News. There I had one page there. Now, Huntsville, I could influence the whole paper in one way or another, whether they thought it was good or not. I'm not quite sure how they felt about me, but anyway. No, I love to write, and I always thought that was the most important form of communication, you know, that was on an equal par with the photographs. And you should be able to write if you're going to be a photographer, because you need to explain what you've done. You know, the said picture tells worth 1,000 words, right? But sometimes you need to explain things in there. And let's see if we can get this. It's going to come back on. I'm sorry, I apologize for this. I use this laptop about once every 3 months. See if we're coming on here. But you notice all these pictures are in black and white. In Tri-X film, we developed our own film, processed, did the printing and everything. And you never knew what you had until you got back and you got the film processed. And there was always so much anticipation, not knowing whether you got the picture, whether you got it in focus, whether the exposure was right. And the other limitation was the 36 shots on a roll of film. And you had to plan out what you were shooting. If there was something, you know, really good happening, you know, you had to plan around that you didn't end up when oh, something great happened and that was the 36th shot and I gotta change, you know, and by the time I get changed, it's gonna be over and done with. So it was, yes, sir, Mark.
What's your thoughts on the state of photojournalism today?
The state of photojournalism today. It's,
Good and bad.
They're doing some great work.
there is some good work. It's, photojournalism per se, I don't know, it seems like everybody has an agenda with the pictures they take rather than just trying to document what's going on. There's a lot of people with a hidden agenda in what they're doing. But the pictures, I think they're amazing. I mean, the things that you can do now with the digital format, you know, digital cameras, you know whether you got it while you're there or not, you can shoot unlimited number of pictures. My goodness, you know, put a big card in there and you shoot all day. And I wish I could have done that way back then. I would have taken a lot more pictures. I wish I had taken a lot more pictures. That's one of my regrets, you know, that I didn't do more when I had the opportunity to. Let's see what's going on here.
Making
Oh my
progress.
goodness. I am so sorry.